Joining me live now is the Executive Chairman of Yellow Brick Roads Home Loans, Mark Bouris. Mark, good to see you. Thanks for your time as always. So Westpac has lifted its forecast for housing growth this year. Some of the numbers here extraordinary. Sydney to 27%, Melbourne 18%, Brisbane 22%, Perth 15%, Adelaide 18%, Hobart 25%. That heat in the market is only increasing.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it's got a lot to do with supply of housing. So if you actually dig into it, you'll see that there's not as many transactions. That's the first thing. I think also if you go a bit further, by the way, I will say this. Bill Evans, who is the author of the Westpac report, I would consider him, and everybody else pretty much considers him as being the number one forecast when it comes to A, interest rates in the future, and B, asset class prices, in other words, house prices. So I would take a lot of notice of what Bill is saying. So I went and dug into the report. And what he's also saying is that the macro-prudential changes that the government's brought, in other words, these changes to the way lenders will assess your ability to repay a home loan, is going to start to bite into those house prices in 2023 and the latter part of 2022. So, yeah, we're going to have a bit of a kick in house prices. We're not talking about unit prices. We're talking about house prices, single dwellings in 2022.
Because that leads me to my next point, because also in that piece, it mentions that Sydney prices will slow to 6% eventually next year and then flatten it. So are you buying that? That seems like quite the drop.
Yeah, no, I am buying it. So we've had extraordinary growth for a whole number of reasons, most of which are sort of extraordinary, like extraneous to our normal flow of how business works in this country. So, and it's got a lot to do with supply, but it's also got a lot to do with lockdown. It's also got a lot to do with the amount of liquidity that's been sitting in the system for banks, lenders like me, to lend to borrowers. Now what we've got is this position where house prices are, real estate's so expensive, people have to borrow so much, wages have not increased, relatively speaking, and also we now have to assess you much harder. He's expecting that house prices will drop off. In other words, demand will slow significantly in latter part of 2022 and in 2023. So I'm buying it, 100% buying it, yes. And I want to reiterate, this has got a lot to do with single dwellings. Now, there's been a new supply of single dwellings, so as developers react very quickly. They go, oh, wow, house prices are going mental. Let's start building house land packages all around the place. And we have a bigger supply of houses right now than we've ever had for a long time. Coming into the system sometime next year, harder assessment of how much you can borrow. Wages are not going to rise in the near term, so I would expect house prices to drop back. 6% is a good sustainable number. Rather see 8, 6 is a good percent.
Okay. I was also having a conversation with another quite successful businessman yesterday, as a matter of fact, and he said, look, banks are going to increase interest rates eventually, and within the next 5 years, I think you'd be looking at an interest rate of about 5% when it comes to your home loans, which seems a lot from where we are now. Essentially, it doubles depending on what rate you've been able to get. But is that accurate? Do you think is that an accurate forecast that people may well be paying 5% for their home loans within 5 years?
I don't agree. I don't agree with that in 5 years. I think people have borrowed so much money, and we keep talking about the debt-to-income ratios, debt-to-asset ratios Australia has. In other words, the amount of money we borrowed over the last, say, 5 or 6 years. I think a 5% retail rate, in other words, the amount of money you pay to the bank, not the Reserve Bank's number.
Yeah.
If people start getting asked to pay 5%, the country's going to go broke unless wages increase. So if this chap you're talking to, maybe the assumption he's making is that wages are going to increase quite significantly to support a 5% retail interest rate on housing loans. Otherwise, the country is going to collapse. So my view is, and this is the view of Bill Evans has been saying too, he's expecting interest rate rises by the Reserve Bank in 2023 to start rate rises. Yeah. And for us to get to 5% retail rate, that's a crushing level. That would be crushing for Australians to have to pay that, given the amount of debt that we've accumulated, unless wages rise. I don't see anything out there to tell me that wages are going to rise. Okay,
well, no, exactly. And they have been flat for quite a while, even before the pandemic. Now, Josh Frydenberg has talked about this, Mark, too. It kind of flags the importance of those smaller lenders as well, where people can go and get a better deal.
Yeah, well, that's really important. So, I mean, Josh Frydenberg this week has been talking about the importance of brokers who give borrowers access to people like Suncorp or Bank of Queensland, like that, a lot of the, or Bank West, or a lot of these banks who don't actually have branch systems, like Macquarie Bank doesn't have a branch system, for example, in Australia, where borrowers can actually go to a broker, and a broker effectively becomes, let's call it loosely, the branch of 60 or 70 different banks, smaller banks, who operate within the country. I mean, there is building societies, credit unions, all sorts of organisations, the Greater Newcastle, all those ones up there in Newcastle, south of Sydney, Illawarra, who can't afford to have a bank branch here, can't afford to advertise on television, can't afford to get in front of you, but they have really good products, really good interest rates, who are dying to get your business. And what Josh's point was is that brokers offer this to people to be able to find who can be the actual best lender to them in the marketplace today, as opposed to just going and getting jammed by a big bank.
Okay. Hey, it looks like it's buzzing behind you, Mark. How's the city this morning?
The city's good. I mean, it's a nice clear day here. As you know, the rain stopped, but it's a bit fresher than I thought. It was a bit warm when I was in my car, but it's a bit fresher than I thought here at Chifley. But the city's busy, I know, because of the amount of time, how long it takes me to get into the joint. Yeah. During COVID, like last week, 2 weeks ago, it was taking me about 20 minutes to get to the city, 15, 20 minutes. I live out that way, east. But today it took me 40 minutes, so the traffic's full on, which is usually a good indicator.
Yeah, it's back. Okay, Mark Bouris, great to chat on a Friday as always. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon.
See you, mate.